Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of What the Dementia by Bambu Care. I'm your host, Brianna Wilson. I am a certified dementia practitioner and the founder of Bambu Care. So, on today's episode, we'll be talking about stigma in dementia. And we will do this by first identifying its roots, and then we'll discuss where we are today and what we can do about it. So, let's first start by defining stigma. So there are a lot of definitions out there, but the one that I feel is most clear is this. Stigma is a set of negative and often unfair beliefs that a society or group of people have about something. So in the case of today's podcast, we will be discussing negative and unfair beliefs held about dementia. Now, why is this topic even relevant and important to discuss? Well, dementia, believe it or not, is actually a widely feared condition, and surveys have suggested that people, especially older adults, are often more concerned about developing dementia than they are about cancer, heart disease, or stroke. And to me, that says a lot. Also, when you consider the low levels of understanding about dementia, that can actually lead to various misconceptions, resulting in the perpetuation of stigma, which is still very prevalent in most countries at, varying levels. To add on to that, people with dementia are often isolated and sometimes even hidden because of the stigma or the possibility of negative reactions from neighbors or relatives to the potential behavioral and or psychological symptoms. And then this idea or misconception that nothing can be done to help people with dementia often leads to feelings of hopelessness and frustration. Now, I will say that while public awareness of the existence of dementia and what it actually means and entails has increased, unfortunately, that has not, as of yet, led to a greater acceptance of individuals who are living with dementia. So, what I want to talk about is why dementia is so feared and often misunderstood. If you haven't listened to our podcast about what is dementia, I would definitely recommend it. And I'll put the link to that episode in the description box, so be sure to check that out. Now, in that particular podcast, we talked about how dementia is a collection of symptoms being caused by some disease or condition. But what we didn't talk about is the first original definition and where it stemmed from. So the term dementia is actually derived from the Latin root demens, D-E-M-E-N-S, which means being out of one's mind, demented, mad, wild, raving, reckless, foolish, okay? And this is all the way back in 1797. And so just from the origination alone, you can probably already tell where this is going and why this could create some serious problems and issues with stigma. So over the years, dementia has really taken on various definitions and beliefs as people have sought to try to understand it. It's gone from being more broadly applied to those who had an acquired intellectual deficit at any age for any reason or cause. So, for example, if you were in your 20s and you sustained something like a serious head injury, you may have been labeled as having dementia, as well as any persons with a severe psychotic illness where they were expressing certain behaviors, they would also be labeled as having dementia. But by about the 19th century, the term was mainly confined to those with a loss of cognitive ability and associated with old age. As we know now, though, although age is a risk factor of dementia, it's not just exclusive to older people. Now, in the Middle Ages, mental illnesses and dementia were regarded as kind of like a punishment imposed by God for sins committed. It was considered that abnormal activities and mental symptoms generated in people with dementia were due to some type of demonic possession, and thus naturally it was subject to a lot of hatred. People with dementia were often victims of things like witch hunts, which were very widespread over the 14th to 15th centuries. Then, in other parts of the world, there was this general perception that people with dementia were just a burden on society and that they should be locked away in institutions. So many did end up being confined to asylums and treated pretty poorly. And unfortunately, maltreatment of those with dementia is still prevalent in some places in the world. In fact, research indicates that people with dementia are at greater risk of elder abuse than those without. And recent studies show that almost half of those with dementia experience some type of abuse or neglect. So that's just absolutely terrible. It's also important to note that in many societies, it was thought that mental and cognitive decline was just this unavoidable consequence of age, and it was seen as normal and inevitable. Therefore, people viewed dementia as something that nothing could really be done about. It just runs its course. It wasn't until the second half of the 20th century that Alzheimer's disease specifically became redefined as affecting both older and younger people. And this shift in thinking accompanied a transformation in the conceptualization of what was referred to at the time as senile dementia and normal aging. And this was great because it really opened up the doors for a new appreciation that dementia was not necessarily a normal part of aging. However, as we know, many people still, in current times, do not realize that dementia is not a part of normal aging. In the late 1970s, dementia emerged as a major public issue through the efforts of a coalition of caregivers and family members who were struggling to deal with dementia in the context of new expectations for aging, researchers who were in the neurosciences, and government officials who were trying to win funding for research on aging and age-associated conditions. And what was really central to the coalition strategy was advancing the claim that age-associated dementia should be reviewed as the result of disease rather than aging, and that aging itself should not normally be accompanied by disease and disability. So campaigns organized around the reframing of dementia, and they were highly successful. By 1980, Alzheimer's specifically had become a household word, and it was good because it was the object of massive federally funded research initiatives. Unfortunately, there were some unintended consequences. So, to make a compelling case for funding biomedical research aimed at treatment and prevention, advocates always implicitly and sometimes explicitly trafficked in what critics called apocalyptic demography, arguing that finding an effective treatment or cure was the only way to avoid an avalanche of dementia cases associated with the aging of the baby boomer generation that would overwhelm the healthcare system. Public policy in the United States largely followed this logic, and as a result, a lot of money was being put into biomedical research, so that area drastically increased. However, relatively little was actually invested in providing specific supports for caregivers or developing creative approaches to improving the quality of life or quality of care for people with dementia. Similarly, in order to make the case that Alzheimer's causes great suffering, advocates depicted the losses associated with dementia as so total and irrevocable as to call into question whether people suffering from it could still properly be regarded as people at all. Crazy, right? And so that greatly deepened the stigmatization of those diagnosed with dementia, and it intensified the anxiety that people felt about even aging itself. So, as you can see, the definition and perception of dementia has been just really one heck of a roller coaster journey and just really all over the place. And public policies that were pursued to help provide support for people with dementia and their caregivers kind of backfired in some ways. So the big question is, where do we stand today? Where do we stand now? So, unfortunately, stigma in dementia is still pretty strong, and dementia overall is still largely misunderstood, and there are a lot of misconceptions. Recent surveys have also revealed kind of how people with dementia perceive not only just themselves but their situation. And so there were 4 statements that people with dementia most agreed upon on this survey. So, one was, I feel less competent than I did before having dementia. 2 was, I encounter embarrassing situations as a result of having dementia. 3, due to having dementia, I sometimes feel useless. 4, I feel lonely more often than usual. And I want to share some specific quotes from 2 persons with dementia who took the survey. So one person said, people in the public are embarrassed and uncomfortable around me at times, and having been a social person, it upsets me that they think I'm stupid. And then another person said, having dementia, I have lost friends and family members who don't want to know about the dementia journey. People often talk about me to others and not to me when I'm sitting right next to the person. Now, this impact of stigma is also felt by caregivers. The most agreed upon statements from the carers were similar to those given by people with dementia, but they were in a little bit of a different order. So 1, I feel lonely more often than usual. 2, I encounter embarrassing situations because the person I care for has dementia. 3, I feel set apart from others who do not care for someone with dementia. And 4, due to the person I care for having dementia, I sometimes feel useless. And I also want to share some specific quotes from 3 caregivers who took this particular survey. So one said, friends and family do not help in practical ways when needing extra reassurance and company. My husband's workmates have not kept in contact since his diagnosis. Another said, my experience was that all the concern was for my late husband. I had no problem with that, but I would have liked to be asked how I was doing. And then the third said, it is such a lonely and isolating condition. My mother's friends stopped seeing her because she was difficult to engage with. She would often comment that she hadn't heard from them anymore. Heartbreaking. So the results of this survey really reveal that both people with dementia and their caregivers kind of struggle with this feeling of being judged by and or disconnected from others, which understandably results in a slew of emotions, right? Now, some other interesting statistics I ran across were that about 33% of the general public agreed to some degree that they could not imagine caring for someone with dementia. But almost 50% of the general public felt frustrated because they were unsure of how to help people with dementia, and another 50% of the general public wanted to know more about how they can help. So I think that at least shows some progress in the right direction, since there are a good number of people who are willing and open to learn more about dementia. And that really is the void that I want to help fill, and why I created Bambu, and why I post content through YouTube and Instagram and this podcast platform. I truly believe that better understanding and awareness of dementia and the personal perspective of people living with dementia would help in reducing negative connotations, lead to societal empathy, reduce fear, and therefore also reduce stigma. I think as a society, we can at least do a few things to help mitigate the effects of stigma and maybe even eventually remove stigma altogether. So for one, we can strive not only to educate ourselves, but educate others as well. 2, we could be more aware of our own attitudes and judgments and work on improving them so that we don't pass those potentially tainted beliefs to others. 3, we could choose our words more carefully and strive to use empowering language that focuses on the strengths and abilities of our partners. 4, we could be as inclusive as possible and help our partners in maintaining control and dignity within their lives. And 5, we could support others because, as I'm sure you know, this is not an easy journey. And so you want to make sure that you're getting the support you need, but you also want to make sure that you're supporting others who need it when you're able to, okay? So we can only do so much by ourselves, but together we can work to better learn, understand, and support the dementia care journey and really make real change in reducing stigma and improving the quality of care and quality of life for those living with dementia and for those who are caring for those living with dementia, okay? So I really hope this podcast was interesting and informative and that you learned something of value. If you have anything that you would like to share, you can send us a voice message on whatthedementia.com, or you can send us an email at podcast@whatthedementia.com. Thank you so much for joining us on another episode of What the Dementia by Bambu Care. We look forward to catching you on the next episode. Take care, and until next time, stay strong, carry on, and remember, you are not alone. Bambu Care is always here.